Welcome to Studying Law Around the World. I'm Claudio Klaus. In each episode, I talk with lawyers, law students, and professors from different parts of the world to talk about legal education, careers, and what the profession looks like in real life. We talk about the hard parts, the surprises, and the decisions that shaped their paths. Whether you're planning to study abroad, thinking about working in another legal system, or just curious about how law works around the world, this podcast is for you. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Studying Law. Today, I have the opportunity to host Priscilla Bonsu. She has a very interesting story. She studied law in Germany. She studied both at UC Berkeley and Emory University in the U.S. and is now working in very interesting deals in the U.S. and also with cross-border deals, including Canada and the U.S. So I'm very excited to chat a little bit about her story and her career. Thank you so much for joining us today, Priscilla.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Claudia, for having me. This is so exciting. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And to start our conversation, I'd love to dive into a little bit about your story.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Priscilla Bonsu. My family is originally from Ghana, West Africa, and I was born and raised in Germany. Grew up there and went to law school at Heidelberg University in Germany, where I focused on obviously German law. It's like the main course, the main class that we had to take, but we could focus and like choose specializations. And so I chose public international law while I was enrolled at Heidelberg. And I also worked for the Max Planck Institute as a law student at that time, focusing on public international law. At that time, I thought I was going to be a diplomat for some reason. I thought I would move to Berlin and be a diplomat and then, move around the world. For that reason, I actually did an internship at the German embassy in Washington, D.C. while I was a law student at Heidelberg. I did that for about 3 months, which was very interesting. I learned a lot, got to see a lot, sort of came back and graduated. And then pretty much I was set on an LLM. I knew I wanted to come back to the US and actually learn about the US legal system. So I was admitted to UC Berkeley. So I flew all the way from Frankfurt at that time. That was my first straight flight to San Francisco, which was like, I think 14 hours nonstop flight. And I did a accelerated LLM program there over 2 consecutive summers. So altogether 6 months. And, I graduated, went back to Germany and realized, okay, if I do want to be an attorney, it has to be in the US. I enjoyed it so much. I would love to go back and actually be, a US attorney. So I was pretty much done with the German system after graduating from Heidelberg University. And I realized also that with the LLM itself, it's very difficult to sort of get an opportunity. And I knew that the JD degree, that is the classic US degree, and that sort of is what everybody has. And I think that would have, at that time, I thought it would improve my marketability or my chances to, get an opportunity. So I looked around and I came across Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, which had a 2-year JD program for foreign attorneys. And I thought, okay, like, why not do this instead of like going back to law school and doing a full 3-year program? And so I applied and I got in and I ended up in Atlanta, Georgia. I did a 2-year program there. And after I graduated, I started out at a firm in Atlanta. And from there, the pandemic started. I was actually early, yeah, it was 2020. And then I ended up in New York City. And I have been in the state of New York ever since. So it's been 5 years since I have been in corporate in the state of New York. And I have never deviated from corporate. I really enjoy it. I love the fact that I chose corporate. Before that, I was more in like international arbitration back in Europe. But when I came to the US, I was so set on business law, corporate law. I knew exactly that is exactly what I want to do. And I've been doing it ever since.
That's quite the story. I love hearing it. And it was really nice to know that you came to know your passions as time went along. It's been
Yeah.
one of the very, very interesting things to listen to stories in this podcast is to see, there's definitely a group of lawyers that are kind of grew up thinking, hey, I want to do law and I want to work with this area of law. And then I would say another group that kind of learns along the way and they're like, I started law school loving criminal law, but then I realized that working with criminal law was a lot harder than it seemed. Anyways, it was just very interesting to see, the different ways that people come to find their passions and corporate it is. I'm also curious to know if there were, really big shocks or hard legal or cultural adjustments that you had to go through when you were moving from, a civil law jurisdiction into a more of a common law jurisdiction?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I think the hardest part was to actually let go of the civil law system and completely open yourself up for the common law system because I didn't know anything else but the civil law system. So, usually in a situation like that, you sort of hold on to what you know and you try to approach the new thing with the approach that you had for the old thing. So, it was hard for me in the beginning to sort of just let go and just completely do what needs to be done for the common law system and totally approach it the way it needs to be approached because I just didn't know that approach. I wasn't sort of familiar with it. And yeah, so whenever panic set in, it would just be like, why isn't it like that? And why isn't, I would just try to look at it from a civil law perspective. But after a while, you start to get more comfortable with it and things like that. It's really just a matter of time and until you get comfortable enough to actually just do what needs to be done for the common law system. So I think that was one of the lessons that I learned, and I think it's an important one because I think you can only go wrong if you approach the common law system like the civil law system and vice versa. Those are two separate cultures, completely different cultures. Just like countries, you wouldn't want to do certain things in one country and do the same thing in another. You just don't do that. Even though it's tough and it's difficult for someone who's coming from a different culture, after a while you'll get used to it. So also be kind to yourself. Everything is really just a matter of time. So after a while you get used to it and then you feel more familiar with it and everything will just flow eventually. But in the beginning, of course, it's very hard, it's very difficult if that's the only thing you know and you don't know anything else. Yeah.
Absolutely. Really love hearing that. And kind of building on that experience as well, and considering the work you build and what you do these days. So I understand you work with corporate and then private equity, venture capital. What's the one lesson that you learned about how deals get done in this international setting?
Realized, I mean, everything was teamwork. I have a great team, lots of folks, lots of attorneys on one team, and we all sort of work together. It's not a one person or one man show, honestly. It's really knowing everyone, sort of sharing the work and delegating and being able to rely on each other and being able to reach out to each other like, hey, I have this question, or can you help me with this? Or, would you be able to take over that part, as I'm doing something else? I think it's very important to sort of have a group of people around and also learning how to be a teammate, how to engage within a team and how to work together as a team because the deals get bigger and bigger, like super large and complex sometimes. And I've never seen one person being able to do everything at the same time, especially in law firms where you're working on a number of matters, a number of deals. It's very quick, like it happens very quickly that, you forget things or you won't catch certain things. So you literally depend on your team. You literally depend on everybody else around you. And you spend a lot of time together, whether physically you spend time together or by email, or virtual, but it's a lot of meetings, a lot of emails, a lot of putting our heads together, even internal meetings and calls just to structure, like plan the structure or strategize and things like that. So you spend a lot of time with your teammates. And I think one of the lessons is exactly that, knowing how to be a good team player, how to understand people and also time management. I believe I'm still working on that, to be honest. I'm not perfect at it, but I think time management is also very important to make sure that you're not over promising and then under delivering because people rely on you, people trust you, people expect you to sort of, do exactly what you promised you would do. And yeah, so it's teamwork. And so you have to know yourself. You have to know what you're capable of, whether you'll be able to deliver certain things at a certain time or not. Communication is obviously also very important. And yeah, so I think those are the essential things that are important.
For sure. And I also saw that you serve as a co-chair in one of the committees for the American Bar Association. I'd love to hear what that experience has been like for you. And also what role has, interacting with other lawyers and being really with peers in the profession has played in your own career.
I've learned a lot actually. We are a group of corporate attorneys from literally all over the world. It's been very interesting to talk to corporate lawyers from Asia, from Latin America, from Africa, Europe. it's a very diverse sort of group, a very diverse committee altogether. And it's again very interesting to hear everybody's approach, what people do here and there, what their priorities are, things they do, things they do not do. I have enjoyed being in the ABA, particularly in the international section. I've met a lot of people from again all over the world, and I've had we have a lot in common. It's interesting to see how you meet people from all over the world and realize that, hey, I think the same way. I had the same thought about this. And it's kind of cool to meet somebody from the other side of the world that actually had the same thought, things like that. So I've always enjoyed like an international environment, particularly in my LLM. That was the first time that I was in a very international environment. And I realized that I thrive in those spaces. And so that is another reason why I decided to do the World Bank traineeship, because again, it was my favorite environment, like everyone from all over the world, and we're all working together and learning from each other. And, I grew a lot during that time. And yeah, it's the same for the ABA. It's been very exciting. It's been, yeah, just very interesting. And I've grown a lot from being a member of the international section of the ABA.
Fantastic. I also saw that you've been featured on the BBC before, and I wanted to hear about, how did this opportunity come about? And also, how have you learned about communicating law to a wider audience that is not necessarily trained in law?
Yeah, so I have always been interested in journalism, to be honest. It's always been sort of like a law slash journalism thing. But at that time when I was in high school, graduated high school, there weren't really like a lot of, I would say like international channels or, place anything where I could have done any of this. So I sort of locked it away and just focused on law. And when the pandemic happened, that was the first time that I kind of thought, okay, maybe I should sort of consider it now, because people were now sort of like tuning in virtually, and you could literally be anywhere in the world and still sort of contribute and be a commentator. And I thought this is the perfect opportunity for me to sort of combine the two and finally be an attorney, but also be in media and sort of serve as a journalist by just commentating on certain or providing comments on certain legal issues. And so that is pretty much how it started. I started off at a few African news channels from Nigeria, from South Africa, from Ghana. And then I sort of came in contact with BBC Africa. And that was also around the time when the Twitter deal happened and when Twitter shut down its office in Ghana. So that was the first time that I was on BBC just to comment on the effects of them shutting down that office in Ghana. So it's been very exciting. I've really enjoyed being a legal commentator or legal analyst on these news channels. And next month, interestingly, I'm going to be on CNN for the first time. So that has always been a dream. So we'll see how it goes, but it's finally here. So I'm excited about that.
That's so exciting, and I'm glad that I get the chance to interview you here in this capacity as well. Something that I always try to ask our guests, because I'm cognizant of who my audience is here, and there's a lot of pre-law students and early career professionals who are either going to law school right now or going through revalidation or credentials in a different country, or early career professionals in general. They definitely dream with working internationally or in cross-border corporate law. That's what I've heard from people who have reached out to me. And I always try to ask my guests, what are a few pieces of advice that you'd give, whether it be something that you wish you knew from the start or that you would have told your younger self, or maybe even some practical steps that you might suggest for whoever wants to get into this kind of career.
Yeah, I think location is very important, but to be honest, for international careers. So it's really about making sacrifices, I guess, moving to those places. And everything is about positioning yourself, I think, and marketing yourself. And if you know you want to do like international work, I think there are certain places where you could find that international work. And you have to just be willing to go there, maybe move there and actually live there and do a lot of networking too. I think there's so many international communities where you could find that kind of work you want to do. You can find people who have been doing that kind of work, and you can find mentors, you can find sponsors in those communities. So I think networking is very important, being in touch with people who can help you. And then also, again, just being where the work is. So physically being there and, yeah, positioning yourself, right? Just to make sure that you're being seen, that you are actually getting that opportunity that you're waiting and looking for. And then also being patient, because I also struggle with that because sometimes I get too excited and it's like, oh, why is it not happening? I need it now. I need it to happen now. So patience is very important. And yeah, staying open minded as well as you're being patient. There might be other options, and one opportunity can lead to another. It might not be directly what you want, but it can lead you to, where you want to be, what exactly you want to do. So I think that would be my advice.
Amazing. To wrap up today's episode, I wanted to ask you, if you look back on your career so far, was there a moment that you pause and think, this is why I chose this path?
Yes, there were actually a few moments where I felt like I've actually accomplished what I was looking for. For example, when that happened with BBC, I was like, wow, this is a moment. This is exactly what I wanted to do years ago when I was a kid, when I was living overseas in Europe. So here's the opportunity. I'm finally a licensed attorney who's on TV with a journalist and talking to the audience and explaining the law. That was an amazing moment for me that I felt like, no, I'm definitely doing the right thing. I'm definitely on the right path. But also there are just smaller moments, even, even during a stressful day where you just sort of like working on this huge transaction and all of a sudden you have these ideas like, oh, maybe we should do it this way and that way. And then it's like, am I really doing this? What's this really? Is this me? Then you feel like, okay, no, this is exactly what I should be doing. I feel like I'm on the right track. This is the path. Because why is it coming naturally that I'm literally sitting here and it's just working. It works. So, yeah, those there are a few moments like that. So, and it feels great. Yeah,
Amazing. Well, I wanted to thank you once again for taking the time to being in the podcast today and sharing a little more about your story. I hope that this may be just the first conversation of many to come.
absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Claudia. Really appreciate it.
And thank you all for tuning into today's episode, and we'll see you on the next one.